this is about how to get more without doing more. I think that it's a conversation. This is the reason I wanted to talk about this one early on, because it's a conversation I've had multiple times with people individually, where they're coming in 2 or 3 times a week, seeing really nice results, and naturally we want more of that. So they're like, can I come in 4, 5, 6 times per week? Can I come in twice per day? No, you can't. Basically, it's because we actually need enough time to adequately recover, because both of them need to be treated with equal respect to get the best possible results. What I'm going to do, this presentation-y part will only probably be like 20 to 30 minutes, and I want to allow enough time at the end for anyone to ask questions, because going through these slides, any one of these slides could be a whole hour talk just on its own. So this is kind of like a high-level overview of the factors that we want to pay attention to. And going forwards, we are going to have more in-depth talks about the specifics. But really, like I said, the goal is not just to do the most work possible. It's how do we get the best possible results with the correct amount of work. And what is correct can vary from person to person, and also will change over time. The fitter and healthier you become, the more work that you are able to recover from given more time. And I want everyone to just like look at this kind of seesaw analogy, because that's very much what we're thinking about. If we're aiming to move up and make progression, there needs to be a good balance between the training stress and our recovery. And I'll talk a lot about this. It's a stress, recovery, adaptation cycle. It happens a lot, and we need to really be aware of that. And you remove any of those pieces and all progress will grind to a halt. We need to treat them equally. Firstly, I actually talk about why it matters more after 50. It matters for everybody, but progressively becomes more and more of a factor to pay attention to, because when you are in your 50s, when you're in your 60s, when you're in your 70s, your body is essentially just less efficient at the things that it used to do in its 20s and 30s. It still does it, but it doesn't quite do it as well. And that boils down to all of the function of how we recover from training, and being more mindful of the fact that that recovery process may not operate smoothly, or that cycle may take slightly longer than it used to. And it's just about giving it respect. I think that's it, especially when people are newer to strength training more specifically. If you're used to running, the more that you do, the more frequently you do it, the faster that you will get better at it, because our lungs are going to recover way quicker. But also lots of runners take that approach and they just try and run every single day. They're also the ones that end up with bad knees, bad back, because the connective tissue, our joints, they won't recover at the same pace. So with strength training, it really is important to allow that adequate time. And the strongest I have ever been in my life, by a long shot, and the most muscle that I've ever held in my life, I was training 3 days a week. And you'll actually notice this trend as people go towards being more like more elite or more advanced with strength work. Their training frequency will actually be relatively low. There's people that like hold world records for like squats and deadlifts, and they will squat and deadlift once per week, because the load that they're lifting are so taxing on their body that they need to allow more time to recover. And these are the best of the best, genetically, probably taking all the drugs in the world to recover, getting massage, getting right nutrition, and they still have to space out their training accordingly. So it does mean training smarter and not just doing the kind of blunt force approach, which is how most people will train when they are 20 and 30. Because essentially you can do pretty much anything, and because you're good at recovering, you'll battle through it. Doesn't mean that you're going to get the best results, but there's not as many consequences for it. You're not as likely to get hurt, and if you do get hurt, you'll recover from it quickly. So training smarter and finding the right amount of stimulus, that's really what we're aiming to do. And as I talked about before, that stress, recovery, adaptation cycle, that's really how this is going to work, because strength isn't built during the workouts. The workout is what creates the signal, tells our body that things need to change, because what happens is we go in, we pick up some weights, and our body goes, oh shit, that was really heavy. Next time that happens, I don't want that to feel so hard. So it will then try to build some more muscle. So next time it happens, we are slightly more adapted to that, which is why it's important for us to increase weight over time, or increase sets or reps or volume or intensity, or all these factors that we will manipulate for you, so that we keep progressing. Because the more changes our bodies make, the more resistant to change comes. at the start, it kind of is okay with it, but the longer that you train for, and I've mentioned this several times in sessions, like I will train for 6 months to add like a few kilos to the bar, whereas most of you are doing that in a week. Like the longer that you do it, the more resistant it is going to get. And if you remove any of these parts from that stress recovery adaptation cycle, you'll run into a brick wall really, really quickly. And it's finding where the Goldilocks zone is for the stress, and that is lower than if you started this at 30. Like it will be. Like it's always going to, the Goldilocks zone is going to get a little, it's going to not only be a lower threshold in terms of the total amount, but the safe zone of what we would want to work in gets smaller. When we're young, it's up here and it's quite wide. We can get away with not doing loads and we can get away with doing loads, and they'll both work. But as time goes on, we move down the spectrum and that range gets tighter. If that makes sense. Probably could have done with a visual for that. But yeah, it's finding the right amount. And this is like a really good analogy for how strength training works and showing us the stress recovery adaptation cycle. It's like getting a suntan. If we are on holiday and we want to try and come back nice and golden brown, but we go out into the sun for about 2 minutes and then we're in the shade, covered up, factor 50 for the rest of the time, like that's probably not going to be enough unless you are ghostly white to get a decent tan over time. And then also, has anyone ever got sunburn before? Yeah, I'm sure, like we've all probably had sunburn at one point or another. And what normally happens is we go perfectly red, really sore, then we start to peel, and then we're like, oh, I'm pale underneath the peeled skin. Like that stress was too much for us to actually adequately recover. Then it's finding a sweet spot where the stress is enough to create the change, but not too much that we can't recover. Exactly the same with lifting weights. How calluses will form on your hands if you stress them too much, then will just blister and then peel away, and then you're back to baby skin underneath. Stress recovery adaptation. But also, exactly the same works with training as the more tanned you get, the darker that you get, you need to then have more sun exposure to keep getting darker, because the increasing melanin in the skin, that kind of actually bouncing back some of those UV rays so they're not making it into the skin. Same as the stronger that you get, the more that we can get away with over time within like certain parameters, not being ridiculous. And also the time between the exposures becomes really important, because we, like I said, if we went out and say 10 minutes of really good sun exposure was enough for us in that situation, if we then go and sit in the shade for 10 minutes and go and do it again, we're still going to end up burning. Like that's the same thing, which is why we really do stress 48 hours for most people is like a very good time frame, allowing one full day off. We can tighten that up if needs be. I would not make a habit of, if you were training 3 days a week, coming in Monday, Wednesday, Friday would not be the optimal way of doing it. Ideally, it would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday wouldn't be the optimal way of doing it. Ideally, we would do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we've got that full day to recover in between, because the fatigue that we accumulate in that one session we will feel it the next session. So we're starting off already fatigued, and then we're going to go and dig ourselves into a slightly deeper hole and then expect us to, go and do it again. It's making sure that we're able to recover from the trough each time. Okay. And recovery is such like a vast topic. When I've had people saying like, oh, you're going to talk about ice baths, you're going to talk about, like, there is literally like 1,000 different factors that you can talk about with recovery. Most of them are things that probably aren't worth us even like contemplating within the first year. We just want to get the basic stuff down. We don't need to overcomplicate things unnecessarily. How I try and approach all forms of training and nutrition, I want to get the best possible results with the least amount of moving part, because complexity is where people end up failing, because things get overcomplicated, overcluttered, and they end up in this kind of like paralysis by analysis, where the easiest thing to do is just to do nothing, pretty much. So the main factors that we pay attention to are training dose, like what's actually happening, what is the stimulus we're doing in terms of the sets, the rep, the exercises that we select. So that's one that I'll dive into a little bit more. The sleep and the rest, just making sure that our body is having sufficient downtime, fuel and hydration, You know, are we actually putting the materials into our body to sufficiently recover in between these bouts of exercise? Because if we are exercising hard and we still have the right gap, but if our body isn't getting what it needs, we'll really struggle to recover properly. And then the daily stress and movement, like what else is going on in your life? And that doesn't always mean physical. Like that's normally the first thing people think of is just like, oh, I've got a really physical job, or I do 20,000 steps a day, or whatever it might be. But also mental stress, family stress, work stress, all of that still pulls from our ability to recover. And I find this still now, times where I'm really mentally overloaded, my training won't ever go quite as smoothly as times where I'm a little bit more relaxed. It's very apparent. So in terms of training dose, this is what we're doing in the gym. And I kind of use these like sliders as a nice way of like visually representing it, because we can't have them all ramped up to full. When we pull one up, that means another one has to go down. Like you can't have maximum intensity, volume, frequency. Like we have to play with these over time. And there's not that one is right and the other is wrong. We actually deliberately want to mess with these sliders time goes on, because if we stay in the exact same structure for too long, that's where we plateau. So we'll deliberately manipulate the rep that you're doing that week, or the intensity, or the amount of sets that we're going to do. And even the exercise selection, that's another one that like most people have no concept of. When we're exercising, certain movements are more taxing on the body, but they don't really give us a much more beneficial stimulus to build more muscle and to get stronger. So it's actually trying to think of the exercises that are going to give us the most stimulus with the least amount of fatigue attached to it. They all come with it, but it's trying to cherry pick the right ones. But also within that, doesn't always equate to the same amount for each person based on how we're built. Like we've mentioned multiple times, like how me and Jim are very different with our squat. Based on how I'm built, I will be able to handle more squat volume than Jim would because of just our leverages, whereas Jim would be able to handle more hinging volume than I would based on our differences. It's not colossal differences, but those things are worth paying attention to, and it's why you'll see some people that they'll have favourite exercises, and generally their favourites tend to be ones that they are biomechanically better built for, because it will just feel like it comes a little bit more naturally to them. Which then, when you're like, oh, I feel like I'm quite good at this, and you see, oh, I'm lifting a bit more than maybe some other people at this, but then another one that you're a bit naff at, and you're like, oh, I don't know about this. This is a bit rubbish. This is just human nature. I still have the exact same preferences of what I like that I did 18 years ago, just because I'm built better for certain things, and the ones that I'm crap at, I'm a bit like, I've got to do them, but I'm never going to love them quite as much as the other ones. So it's just trying to think about all of these factors that, if you're staying with us, we handle all of this. This is what we kind of keep manipulating over time, because, as I said, the longer that we train for, the more resistant our body is going to be making these changes. So we deliberately are going to have to play with the sliders to keep us progressing. You can't just come in and do the same thing and try and add a kilo every time, because if it was that simple, we would all be Eddie Hall, lifting 500 kilos, and we'd only have to train for a couple of years. It's not that straightforward. I wish it was. Most of the time we can probably get away with things being that simple for a few months, but when that stalls out, it's knowing what slider do I manipulate next. Oh, actually as well, that's quite a good point there, I forgot. A heavy leg exercise may actually take more recovery than a lighter accessory exercise. So I won't bore everyone too much, but we categorize exercises as like isolation exercises and compound exercises. So a compound basically means that multiple joints are working at the same time. So when all the ones that we do, they're compound exercises. Like when we're squatting, our hips are bending as well as our knees, right? But then if we were doing a bicep curl, that's an isolation, single joint, just my elbow. So that's how we'd categorize it. Single joint movements, isolation movements, are lower load because they're only, they're working less muscles, generally speaking, easier to recover from. You might think, oh, brilliant, why don't I just do everything as isolation? Because then you'd have to do 400 different exercises. And in the real world, our body doesn't operate in isolation. You can't, when you need to go and pick up something heavy off the floor, you're not going to just go like that with it, when we can use multiple joints to actually use our full body to lift a greater load. We're not like pieces of Lego that can be like clicked together. We're meant to operate one cohesive unit. So that's why we train like one as well. And the stimulus to fatigue. So that's what I talked about in terms of from a specific exercise point of view. Some will come with more stimulus and some will come with more fatigue. And most of the time they'll correlate. Generally speaking, exercises that are really high in fatigue will also be pretty high in stimulus. Not always the case though. But there is the stimulus fatigue that is happening within the entirety of a session or training week. We are mostly doing 2 sets of exercises. That's generally what we'll do. We will play around and go up to 3 sets on certain things. We'll even drop down to single sets on other things as time goes by, because there are diminishing returns with adding more sets and more reps. The fatigue stack. So if you do 2 sets of something or you do 4 sets, you've doubled the fatigue, right? But from a stimulus point of view, you might go from 2 sets to 4 sets and you've only added 20 or 30% extra stimulus. That flatlines over a certain period of time, and actually, probably to be more accurate, that actually starts to go back down after a certain point. And then the fatigue that we accumulate just ramps and ramps and ramps, which is why we're aiming for that sweet spot of not too much workload, but enough to make sure that we recover sufficiently. And especially, again, I've had this conversation even this morning about people that are used to doing more work in other forms where, like, you might go to a bloody Zumba class or something like that. I don't know, where you dance around, not knocking it, but kind of am. But you're like dancing around for like 40 minutes. Like, that's great. You've just been getting sweaty. You're getting your heart rate up. You're not really doing anything taxing. Strength training cannot perform like that. If you can do that weight for that duration of time, it's not strength, it's cardio. It's too light. The indication is that you need the rest in between to repeat these bouts. And if you look at people that are in the Olympics, where they do the clean and jerk and the snatch and stuff like that, Olympic lifting is renowned for it, where they will go in, they'll do like a single rep or a double, and then they'll go and sit on the side for 15 minutes because they want their next set to move just as good as the first set. They don't care about accumulating loads of fatigue within that session. They want to actually practice perfect technique and nail it every single time. So that's like one polar extreme of it. But what we're trying to do is make sure that things are taxing enough so that you are progressing and moving forward, but then you still need that 90 seconds or so while your partner's going and while you're getting ready to go again, so that we can repeat with a decent amount of intensity. So stimulus to fatigue applies to many things: individual exercises, an individual workout, and the overall training week or even training month. That can, you can zoom out. Sometimes with more advanced training, we will deliberately let more fatigue accumulate. So we will kind of let this stack up. So you're getting a bit of a back catalogue of fatigue, which is carrying over from session to session or week to week. And then we'll deliberately do what's called a deload, where everyone will just be doing everything super duper light just for 1 week, so that then all this extra fatigue debt that we are carrying has a chance to clear, and then our body super compensates. Because essentially what is happening, we're coming into training, we dig ourselves in a little bit of a hole, and then we recover, and then when we pop back up, we're slightly higher than we were previously. That's how it works. That's the stress recovery adaptation cycle. Right now, it's happening from session to session. The longer that we do it, though, then that's going to go from session to session to, it might take a whole week to feel that cycle. Then it might take a whole month to feel that cycle. Then it might take several months to feel that cycle. And that's really when we start to move into different forms of programming for clients in terms of the sliders that we're messing around with. I hope I'm not boring everyone or confusing everyone here. I've got some vacant looks here. Right. Another part of it is sleep and rest. Again, as I've said, any one of these slides could be an hour talk. I'm going to just keep this really, again, as an overview. That's where a lot of the repair work is being done. Poor sleep is going to have a massive effect on your energy, on your strength, your balance, your mood. Any pain levels, inflammation can be affected massively by it. Your actual motivation, mentally where your head's at, and that speed of recovery. Better sleep often will mean better training, and being able to get good sleep hygiene, being able to organise a good routine, I say this to Kirsty all the time, actually. I say about loads of things. You're not allowed to moan about something unless you're actively working on it. If you're working on it and it's still shit, then fair enough, moan all day. But if you are like, oh, my sleep's rubbish, and I was like, oh, do you do anything about it? But no, it's just rubbish. I was like, well, there we go then. Like, if you're working on it and it's still hard, feel free. But like, this is one thing that I hear people talk about: sleep being poor, day after day, week after week, and most people won't just put their phone down a bit earlier, like silly things like that, reading a book before bed. There's so much information out there how to, like, not everything is going to work for every person, but there are so many things that are so readily available. Just a quick search on YouTube could give us 100 different things to try to get better sleep. And I will talk about it because I struggled with insomnia from about 14 through to really like actually my late 20s, on and off, depending on what was going on. And it was actually only until lockdown where I actually felt like I completely nailed it now, where I can just be gone in minutes. But that's something that I would just lie in bed, no phone, no nothing, and I could just be there for hours and hours and hours till the early hours of the morning, until I was absolutely exhausted, fall asleep for like 2-3 hours, wake up, feel like crap, and then just rinse, repeat that cycle. And it took basically things to get really, really bad for me to get to a point where I actively tried basically everything, and loads of it didn't work, and a few bits did work, and then I just stuck with that. Fuel and hydration. I just think this bit's actually probably the most important part. Training gives the body the reason to change. Food gives it the materials to do so. Because you can do everything right, you can get your sleep right, you can train really well, but if there isn't the adequate resources within your body to recover properly, you will progress, but considerably slower than you would otherwise. And that's something that I always want to pay attention to, because protein helps the body repair and build muscle. Carbohydrates is the body's primary source of energy. Lots of people demonize carbohydrates for a long time, but they're really important. And also water, like sports joints, focus, performance, and recovery. And water is one of the ones that probably will have the most acute effect. If you go into a session well hydrated compared to dehydrated, there will be a profound difference in what you'd actually be able to lift in that session. So just thinking about what you drink for the first, like for 2 hours before you turn up to the gym. Ideally, you stay hydrated year round, but it's kind of very important prior to training. Fats aren't mentioned on there because fats aren't as important for the specific training sessions, but fats are also really important for overall health, for hormone production. I really wouldn't want anyone to be consuming less than 30 to 50 grams of fat a day. That's quite bad for your brain health if you're not consuming at least a small amount of fat. But again, this is a whole topic that can be explored. And exactly as I talked about with like training though, so I just thought of something that's quite silly, but with like water, right? We all know that drinking water is good for us, yeah? And yeah, aiming for about 2 litres a day would be a really solid target for everyone, and we'd all probably say that's pretty decent to do. It's not necessarily easy to do, but decent. If we drank 20 litres of water, does that mean it's better? No, because we'll die. There's actually water toxicity that would kill us, which is exactly the same way of thinking about training. There is an appropriate amount. More isn't better, and that applies to basically everything in life. So I want us to think about our stress as, as a cup, and our recovery as a tap that's constantly trickling out. And we want to be mindful of what we put into the cup, because that's going to help it fill up. But also we want to think about how open is that tap also. There are ways that we can kind of open that tap up a little bit wider to let that stress pass through a little bit quicker. And it's just active recovery. It is way better to go out for a nice gentle walk for 20 minutes, half an hour, than to do nothing at all. You will recover better for this gentle movement. But gentle is the thing, like don't go out and do something that's super vigorous that's going to add to the fatigue. But sitting on your ass all day, also, it might seem like, oh, that's going to be best for recovery. I'm just going to lie on the sofa for 48 hours until I come in to train again. Not the case at all. We want to just find that sweet spot. But thinking about what else is being added to that cup. And as I mentioned before, like work and family responsibilities, they will massively impact how we can feel session to session, how things are going to go, how we're going to perform, poor sleep? Are we ill? That's a really big one there. Like, she just getting sick. It could just be completely unrelated to what we're doing, but our body is having to work a lot harder to try to fight whatever's going on inside, which leaves less resources to recover from training. And I see it all the time where people they've been ill for a bit, maybe they've had a week off if they really needed to. They're like not fully on the mend, but they're like, they come in and train, and then the next day they're downhill again. And I've noticed it with like getting tattoos. I've done like 8-hour sittings, and like I'll have like a flu the next day. I'm like, you feel horrendous, but like it's just because like, you know, I've been stabbed millions of times, I've lost blood, and I'm like, you know, although I'm like, you know, feels tender, but you'd be like, oh, how does that actually affect you? But you know, you feel so run down from that. It's a stress on your body. And just bearing in mind that lifting weights is just one of them. How physically busy you are with work, if you are running around, carrying boxes, doing all kinds of things, and also sitting still for a long period of time, that is another one. If like we're not designed to do that, we're not designed to be sat at our desk for 8 to 10 hours a day. That's harder for our body to recover from. So gentle movement, always a pro. So what I want, firstly, if we've got any questions, we'll go through those, but follow the plan. Lift weights 2 or 3 times a week. Try to add weight when is appropriate. Don't be silly and jump too far ahead. But I want everyone to think about like one of those factors, whether it be their sleep, whether it be getting a bit more protein in, hydrating better, or being more active in between. Don't try to do all of them. I'd like you to all think like, which is the one that I probably am the shittest at, because that one will actually yield the best gains if in terms of like, that's the one that you're worst at, so that'll be the easiest one to see improvements on. So just pick one of those things and then think, right, okay, what you can talk to me about it. Obviously, if you've got questions, and now be the time to ask it, but also just having a little look online. Google is great for most things, especially when it is relatively basic stuff around our sleep, our protein levels. I'm going to open up for questions now. I do remember we had one question for somebody who couldn't make it, so I'm just going to answer that one first, if that's okay, and then if anyone else has them, feel free to ask. So the question was, how much protein should I have? There's studies done on quite decent ranges of this. So I don't think you need to be super anal and try to get it to the exact gram, just like as long as we're in the ball. But good general rule would be 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass. So you're like, oh, how do I work out what my lean mass is? So this is another topic. So firstly, work out how much you weigh. Go and stand on the scales. If you've got scales that will give you a body fat percentage, take it with a pinch of salt, but it's at least be roughly there. Honestly, one of the easiest ways of doing it, you can just Google like images of body fat percentage and then go and just have a look and be like, okay, how thin or fat am I compared to this? And it was like, okay, it looks like I'm somewhere between 20 to 25%. That would be a nice ballpark. And that's fine for now. We don't have to be precise and to the exact number. So then if we use me, for example, I'm about 200 pounds. And let's say my body fat percentage is 20%. So 20% of 200 pounds would be 40 pounds. So I would deduct that from the 200. So that's 160 pounds. We all following? Yeah. So then that would mean about 160 grams of protein would be a nice sweet spot for me. Okay. The only times where that would be altered slightly is if we are in quite a steep calorie deficit. So if we're trying to lose more weight, we're going to have less total calories, which means our body's going to find it harder to hold on to muscle. So actually then I would probably look at, instead of going from 1 gram per pound of lean mass, you actually might want to be somewhere between 1.3 to 1.5 grams per pound of lean mass. So that might mean that I would actually probably be at like, what that 1.5 would be, 240 grams of protein, and that would be at the 1.5. Somewhere in that range. Like, I've been training since I was 16 and I still don't do it consistently. Like, I have to pay constant attention to it. It's something that, like, most things that we're going to get generally aren't going to have a ton of protein in unless it's like slapped right in front of you on the label. talked about a lot more now, and it's probably easier to find products that are higher in protein. But generally speaking, like animal products, meat, fish, dairy, if you are vegetarian or vegan, beans, legumes, tofu, there's other alternatives. It's if you 100% can see just as much progress if you are veggie or vegan. It is just harder work. I was vegan for like a year, and I was just getting weaker and weaker because I not be asked to be as thorough as I needed to be. And then within a month of reintroducing meat back into my diet, it was so much easier to hit protein goals. My strength was all of a sudden going straight back up. And that's just because I'm lazy and I want things to be simple. And by adding that in, it added more complexity than I could be asked to deal with. So that's that. Okay. Does that all make sense? Okay. Right. We got questions? Yeah? We go?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Okay. What's that?
Yeah. So because this is recorded, when anyone asks me a question, I have to try and remember this. I'm going to repeat the question just so it's caught on the mic. So the question was about protein powders. Is there a place to fit that in? So same with all supplements. The key is in the word. It is supplementary. So add them in when needed. I use protein powders occasionally. I normally have quite a big appetite, so I would rather get my calories from actual foods. So if I'm going to have, I don't want to drink 200 calories where I could rather eat the 200 calories. But if it is at a point where if our appetites are smaller, it tends to be the case where protein powders become more useful, then you're like, I'm just absolutely full and I can't really, I'm only, 100 grams of protein and I need to be at 120, 130. 100% just go and get a protein shake. There's nothing wrong with it at all. I just want everyone to at least attempt to try to do it with real food. That would be preferred. But also as well, one thing that I use it for and have used it for a lot in the past is because I've got a sweet tooth. So, I want something that's nice and sweet and tastes like chocolate or whatever. And most protein powders now, they're so much better than they were like 15, 20 years ago. They all just used to taste like blended cardboard. Whereas like now they taste amazing. So actually then from a like a satisfaction point of view, gives you an opportunity to like have something that tastes just like a really nice milkshake, but it's going to be lower in calories than a normal milkshake would be, and it's got a load of extra nutrition in there as well via the protein. So 100%, I actually think that it's a very smart move for everyone to have like some protein powder in their cupboard, like just in case. Because what I used to do again, if I'd get to the end of the day and I haven't hit my protein goal, I'd just go and quickly make myself a protein shake, and I'd just like to sip that before I go to bed. It's just a nice, quick, easy way to boost it up. Okay, is that all right? Any other questions? Yeah.
Suppose that like lots of that.
Yes.
About those people.
Yeah.
Is basically that eating level.
Yeah.
So what actually the second one?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So with so the questions about creatine, what types are they useful? So creatine is great. Generally speaking, I think 95% of the population is a responder to creatine. There's a small percentage of people that for some reason don't get any results from creatine at all. There are a few people that can potentially get some kidney issues from creatine, as well as it's probably, I don't want to scare everyone, but I'm just being like explaining it. It's the most well-researched supplement and the safest supplement that we are aware of, and almost everyone will see some improvements. What it essentially, it does multiple things, but it allows us to recover a little bit better, will allow us to be better hydrated. It will allow our muscles to hold more intramuscular water, so the muscles are hydrated so they can perform better. That also means that you will short term see the weight go up on the scales, but that's not bad. That's because your muscles are better hydrated. So it is technically water weight, but water can be held in different formats. Intramuscularly, it can be held like subdermally under the skin, where that's the type that most people don't want to see, basically, where we'll look very smooth and jiggly. So yeah, that can be great. There's loads of cognitive benefits. That's where a lot of them comes from around women going through menopause. What I don't know all the ins and outs, and I'll just be honest about all the cognitive benefits, because actually a lot of this research is relatively new, and especially even the dosage, they're actually saying having like doses considerably higher than what we previously would dose at, but allows similar levels of brain function while people are sleep deprived as well, which is also another common thing while women are going through menopause or flushing through the night. So they'll tend to have really terrible interrupted sleep. And we recommend it for our carer clients, which often, again, have very interrupted sleep. So it basically allows your brain to function a little bit more efficiently while things aren't in the best position, like from sleep debt. But then also it'll help with performance. It's a relatively cheap supplement. In terms of the types, there are a bunch of different ones. Creatine monohydrate, that's the one I would go for. It's relatively cheap. It's the one that almost all the research has been done on. There is a newer, it's all just around the molecule shape, basically. It's still the same thing. I won't bore everyone with it, but like, we're splitting hairs here, but creatine monohydrate is the one that almost all the research is done on. There's a new one which I think is like HCl or HCM or something like that. It's like 3 times the price. There is very small evidence that it is more beneficial, and fortunately enough, the companies that are selling it are the ones funding that research. So again, you just like take it with a grain of salt. I always tend to look for things that have been independently studied, meta-analysis across multiple studies, so that you know it's not someone's bias towards like a certain thing. But creatine monohydrate is like, yeah, the go-to for most people. I'll know what you haven't asked it, but people talk about a loading phase with creatine where you take a larger amount for a shorter period of time. It has to build up in your system. It's not something that works acutely. It doesn't really matter. Like, yes, it will get into your system slightly quicker. It's not something that you're going to see immediate benefits on anyway. And generally for me, the only time I notice that I'm taking creatine is when I stop taking creatine, because it is subtle. We're talking like 1% or 2%. But because it happens so subtly, you can't really tell if you're like, oh, I'm just training and things are improving as they do normally. And then when you stop and then you notice that start to like dip off a little bit, you're like, oh, the creatine was working there. So it's one of those, it's really subtle, but something that's relatively cheap, and especially for those like cognitive benefits, is something that I've stopped supplementing, but I have actually thought about reintroducing for my brain more than my body, actually. Okay. Do you have a question?
That's this is what we talk about. Like,
yeah,
the obviously,
good question. Beer. Definitely don't recommend. Definitely don't recommend a beer before training.
it's fine.
You can have a beer after training. That's fine. So what I would say is generally, whether it's can of pop, whether it's some squat, whether it's coffee can dehydrate you. There's some few things in coffee that cause dehydration. It can as a diuretic. So coffee is maybe the exception, but for the most part, whether you're drinking water or squash, it's not going to make that much of a difference. It doesn't matter too much. If we are very well hydrated, then you need to pay attention to things like electrolytes as well. So sodium, potassium, those are the ones that are quite important to have, especially when it's hot and we sweat. The reason that our sweat tastes salty is because we are sweating out some of those electrolytes. So it's important for us to replenish them. And the more that we drink, the more that we kind of filter through them. So it is actually appropriate for us to increase electrolytes with increasing hydration. You actually sometimes will notice that you will feel slightly worse if you just go from drinking no water to drinking 3 liters a day, because we're flushing through all our electrolytes. That's actually, I talked about earlier, if you drank 20 liters of water and it'd kill you. That's actually partly why it flushes out all the electrolytes, which messes with our brain's ability to send signals, and we'll end up like going into seizures and it's a horrendous way to die apparently. So yeah, don't try that. But yeah, electrolytes important as well. Don't sweat it too much though. It's one of those things that, like, if you salt your food, as long as you don't salt it like crazy, like that'll probably deal with most of it. And then eat a banana once in a while, maybe keep some electrolytes in the cupboard. Like, again, same kind of thing, supplementary, right? If we can do it with our real food, then we do it with our real food. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
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 On a video.
Yeah. Yep.
Probably like spread no both really right. I'll be pressed for the white on white base. This you know about med.
Yeah.
That is like on pop that
100%. Yeah. So the question is around balancing lifting weights with other forms of exercise, basically. And the answer to being able to swim and do yoga, which are generally more gentle forms of exercise and also more cardiovascular slightly, especially with the swimming, that's fine. They're very different types of training stimulus. So there is still adding to that total amount of fatigue that you're accumulating, but because it's not the same style over and over again, like then you can get away with it more. The more different the training methodology, the less overlap it's going to have, so it won't stack up quite as much. If you were doing something like really power based, like if you were like a 100-meter sprinter or shot putter or something like that, that probably would be more detrimental to lifting weights than going out for like a steady jog or going out and swimming for a prolonged period of time or doing yoga. So you've still got to be mindful of overall fatigue, but the more different the formats of exercise, the more that you can get away with. And actually that's quite a nice balance, like holistic approach to doing it, because the yoga and the swimming can be recovery, which I talked about as well, which is why I would still rather we try to do them on separate days if possible, opposed to doing 2 a days. Like that still can be tricky, because especially if you came in, you've done yoga and then you go and do some strength work, because you've done more stretching and mobility, your muscles are actually more elongated and relaxed. And if you look at most like elite lifters, again, I'll use them as an extreme, they will be quite immobile. Like some like people that are like power lifters and they will, bench press and the bar has to touch their chest. They are so thick and bound up with muscle and their connective tissue so tight, they can't even get the bar to touch their chest until they've got like 100 kilos in their hand. They literally need that weight press them down. So that imagine all that elastic energy that they're ready to just throw that bar off them without even trying, because they just become so thick and bound up with tightness. So like tightness can generate a lot of power. So if you've gone and made yourself nice and loosey-goosey, you might not be able to generate the same amount of force that you would have otherwise. But doing it the other way around, if you came in strength trained and then went off and did some yoga afterwards, that would work a little bit better. Okay. Any more questions? Yeah.
Do you recommend magnesium?
Yeah. So I take magnesium before bed. Again, it's another good general one. What I do, I get my bloods done every 12 months, just because I try to supplement what I need to supplement. I may be changing my stance on it a little bit. I used to be quite against people just taking a general multivitamin, because most of them, they're just loaded with shit that aren't actually active ingredients, or like they're not bioavailable. So it's on the label, but our body can't absorb it very well, because with multivitamins, they tend to put the cheapest forms of them in there. Also, it means that sometimes you're going to have like 2 or 3 times the recommended amount of one thing and 10% of something else. Whereas if you just supplement individually based on what you need, it tends to mean that it's actually, you can pick the source, so you know that it's going to come from like a bioavailable version of the thing that you're trying to take. But yeah, magnesium is a good general one that most people can get away with taking. Okay. Is that all right? Yeah. Fiona, you got one? Oh, did you not? Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you had a question. Any other questions?
No.
Yeah, Alice? Yeah, so the question is about what sort of diet would we be on. Firstly, I don't like using the term diet, because it kind of insinuates that it's a short-term thing. I want us to think about this as more of a lifestyle change. I've never really been on a diet. I just adjust what I do slightly. And again, it's like those sliding scales. Let's just look at where's the thing that we can make 1 change to or 2 changes to that are going to start giving us a result. And then we just do that for a little bit. And when the results start to plateau, what's the next thing that we can have a little tinker with? I always recommend working out. If it depends on whether we're trying to lose weight, maintain our weight, gain weight. But there's again, this is going to be a whole talk in itself, just purely on this of like how we're going to calculate how many calories we need. Then when we know how much protein we need, we then deduct the protein from our total amount of calories, which will leave us a certain amount of calories left. Then we want to say, look, probably have 30 to 50 grams of fat in there as a minimum. So we'll deduct that. And then whatever's left will be our carbohydrates. Yeah, exactly. That's why it needs to be a whole talk to itself. We can go into this in more depth because nutrition is something that, like, just understanding the basic fundamentals will yield almost all the results. If we can just teach you the absolute bare bones, that will get you so far. But it's also something that you can talk into like infinite complexity and go really deep down this rabbit hole, which I don't like to do unless we absolutely need to. Just follow the basic rules. Firstly, like, I think that most people should start track their food in some capacity, just being whether they use an app like MyFitnessPal or whether you write it down, because that's the data that we're actually working with to know. Like, I hear it all the time where people are like, oh, I've tried everything to lose weight. I'm like, oh, how much do you eat? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. But well, we need the data, because do we know what a calorie is? What that calorie means? It's a unit of measurement for energy. If we put more energy into our body than we expend, it gets stored as fat. So if we don't know how much we're putting in, how do we ever know what to do? We've got to like start to understand that it's fuel, essentially. Same as like, you putting fuel in a car, but instead of it just spilling out of the tank, it's going into fat reserves. That's basically what's happening. So it's not, can't give you like a simple answer on that, but understanding calories, understanding macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats and proteins, what they are, where they come from, how much you should be roughly having. And again, I'm saying roughly because I don't want everyone to be popping up half a Rice Krispie before they go to bed to make sure that they've, hit it on the head. Like we've got some wiggle room, and also zooming out enough to understand that what's happened, like your body doesn't press reset at midnight and then it's a whole new day. Like actually zoom out and think, like, let's look at it over the course of a week or over the course of a month. What I sometimes do, I'll deliberately have my calories lower from Monday to Friday. So I'll save 200 calories. I'll be in at 200 calories less Monday to Friday, which then that stacked up an additional 1,000 calories for me that then I would be able to eat on a Saturday and have a takeaway. Yeah. Like you can mess around with. Just want to say one more thing. Like one thing I've also done is I've messed around with fasting. So I actually, for a period of time, I would do one 24-hour fast per week. And then that meant that I had like basically a whole day of 2,500 calories that I'm now able to like disperse through the rest of the week. And for me, that was something that's relatively easy to do. So like it doesn't always, fasting's a whole other topic to get into as well, which we don't need to talk about now, but like that's another thing to talk about. Sorry, I just want to, Leanne, you add one first.
Okay. So you recommend the CAEA tablets or not?
It'll give you a, oh, okay, no worries, sorry about that, yeah. No. If anyone does need to leave, feel free to go. So the tricky bit with working out how many calories you burn is it doesn't really have much context, because it doesn't. So one of the biggest factors is how much muscle mass you have. If you hold more muscle, because muscle's like a greedy tissue, it requires calories to stay on your body. So I've used this analogy before. It's like having a car with a really big engine. You can just sit at the traffic light and you're just burning through calories. But it also doesn't know how active you are throughout the day. You can, it might say like moderately active, to extremely active. What does that mean? Who knows what that means? So it's not that accurate. The best way of doing it is track your calories every single day, track your weight every single day. And then if we know your calories average out over the course of a week at 2,500 and your weight has been stable, then you're eating a maintenance. So if you want to lose weight, you need to knock 200 calories-ish off that, and that should probably start to see our weight go down. So you can use it as a ballpark, but the only way of doing it is actually like just do it, basically. Track calories, track your weight. They're much of the same. NutriCheck, MyFitnessPal. It's just different methods of tracking, but even old school of literally just like writing it down. Like, so if you go from zero tracking at all, if you have absolutely no clue, and then you roughly track, we're still in the right direction.
Example.
Yes. So when you're weighing yourself, best practice is first thing in the morning, butt naked, after going to the toilet, because whether you've had a wee or a poo can adjust your weight. So the most likely consistent time to weigh yourself is after that. But don't be worried if you have these like fluctuations. Hormonal things can cause fluctuations in weight, but also sodium levels. Like I am notorious for this of like, if I have a takeaway, I can weigh in like 3 or 4 kilos heavier the next day. And then that will then taper off each, I might be 2 kilos lighter the day after. And it's just because I've had loads of sodium, especially as well as you hold more muscle mass, because of talking about that intramuscular water, like I'll just bloat up and I'll look terrible for like a day or two. And then that sodium will slowly flush out my system. So weight isn't fat as well, remembering that there's other reasons for that. But yeah, weigh yourself ideally first thing in the morning, before you're dressed, after you've gone for a wee and a poo. That obviously, that's what you're aiming for. Doesn't always mean that you're gonna, like, sometimes, like, I'll talk about it because I don't care. I'll share anything. If I've not been able to go to the toilet because I just didn't need to go, I would just like make a note, like I couldn't go, so I might be like half a kilo heavier than what I actually was because I'm carrying stuff around with me. Like all of that food that you've eaten through that day, like what did that weigh? You know what I mean? That was probably quite, probably 500 grams. Is that reasonable? If not a lot more than that. So we are still walking around with it. That's not fat. Yeah.
Yeah, but they really want to be tearing off you.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, that's something we see a lot where people would be really good at tracking their food, and then the milk in their teas and coffees, the sugars, all those other little bits. I've known people that have had like 400 or 500 calories of additionals that they didn't account for because they didn't think to do that. Also, reading labels properly. Another one springs to mind of somebody who was having salmon most days. And she logged it all down. She didn't realise that, they come in normally like 2 fillets, don't they? She thought the calories were for both fillets, but it was actually just the one. Has everyone ever actually measured out a portion of cereal? Yeah. If anyone's ever put cereal into a bowl and be like, oh, that's what 25 grams looks like. Yeah, you got about 3 Cheerios at the bottom of the bowl. The thing is now, though, that we've got to be really mindful of like pressure that's put onto companies from the government around these like calorie restrictions and sugar content. So what they're doing to like artificially make their products look healthier is reducing portion sizes, or what they classify as a portion. So chocolate bars are getting smaller, so everything's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but we aren't necessarily clocking that and paying attention to it. That's why I do think tracking, you don't necessarily have to track for the rest of your life, but I think having a good few months where you really pay attention to what you're putting into your body helps calibrate your idea of what an appropriate amount of food for you is. And then you can stop, because I tend to only track for like a handful of months a year. But what I'll notice is the longer I've not tracked for, I lose my calibration, and then when I start again, I'm like, oh, actually, I've been eating a bit more than I thought, or I've not been eating as much protein as I thought. So then having those few months where I tighten it up again and recalibrate, so then I'm like, right, okay, I can stop for a little bit, and I'm not going to be a million miles out.
If remembering to it was like,
MyFitnessPal or NutriCheck, or there's a bunch of others where you can scan a barcode. And the thing is, the more that you do it, so it's a pain in the arse at first, but if you eat similar things, you can save it. So you have like, it basically, once you've done it for a couple of weeks, because most of us, as much as we don't realise, if you look over the course of a month, we've probably eaten fairly similar things relatively repetitively. So once they're in and you've created them, all you need to do is just tap on it. Like, it genuinely can take you like 5 minutes a day by the end of it. And then we've got like 100% perfect data of like, maybe not 100% perfect, but we got like, 99% of the way there of like exactly what we're putting into our body. But it is more work at the start to get it going, and then to be like, oh, I'm going to have to weigh out XYZ things all the time. But then after a bit of time, you'll be able to just be a little bit faster with it. Okay.
very got so good, Rosie. I got all the breakfast.
Yep.
So in the morning, free. Giant. Actually, I got pilots to what pilot that.
Not necessarily. Like whey protein is the one that has got one of the better amino acid profiles. The amino acids are like what the protein molecules kind of made up with. So plant proteins often aren't complete protein, so then our body's not able to absorb them as well. Animal products tend to be a lot more complete protein. So like collagen protein, that's a really good one. I tend to actually between collagen and whey protein, collagen tends to actually then be better for skin, hair, connective tissue, things like that. But again, I wouldn't really sweat it too much. Whey protein is what you're going to find most of the time, unless you're lactose intolerant like me. So if I get just standard whey protein, I will be farting all night, like it's horrendous. So you can get one. Yes. So you can get. It's called hydrolyzed. So it's how they molecule. So it breaks it down into smaller particles. So somebody was explaining this to me, but basically the lactose molecule isn't still attached to it anymore. So it's the lactose that's in the whey that causes the problem for me. So hydrolyzed, if you have gut issues from dairy, can be a nice way of doing it. Or collagen, you can get beef proteins, which I've never actually tried. They sound a bit, but they're still like chocolate ones and stuff, but they came from like a beef derivative. I don't really understand that. Just weird. But like vegan ones, that again, they will deliberately, any good vegan protein will have a combination of like hemp protein powder, pea protein powder, so that they're getting amino acids from different profiles. So they try to create a more complete profile. So yeah, most of the stuff that you're gonna, like, generally don't go for the cheapest shit, don't go for the most expensive stuff, go for something that's like somewhere in the middle. Look on Amazon that's got some decent reviews. There's companies that are like CNP is a company I use a lot. My Protein I've used a lot. Perform, which is PR4M, I think. They're pretty good. There's tons. They're all much of a muchness, and they're all probably all manufactured in the same factory in China. Just slap a different label on it afterwards, to be honest with you. Okay?
So, they're not people might learn. I'm a very complex breakfast. Why the breakfast I alternate up that. Stick strains, ball strains.
So,
Now it's one big bowl, 3 weeks a day, chocolates a day. What's that?
So it's like what we try to do is like, what's the smallest possible adjustment that we could reasonably make? So like, if we can then think, okay, let's reduce the amount of sugar that's on there, or can we find like a sweetener alternative? Or you can actually have milk flavored protein powder or milk that's got added. Don't worry, see you later. See you in a bit. Protein added milk with added protein. So then we can like just make a minor adjustment, which actually allows us to get more protein in that meal, maybe reduce the calories slightly. So it's a very minor change. Yeah, regimented.
How also this night down to this city that I know.
Yeah.
Steve Gavin, fussy.
Kirsty is a terribly fussy eater, and
Right.
I
If I that like there. See.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, so there's so many different things. There's so many different options, but I always think about, let's not try to jump from one extreme to another. Is there just one minor alteration we can make? Like if someone's like, I have 3 sugars in my tea, can we manage 2.5 and then do that for a couple of weeks? And then can we go to 2? And then, you know what I mean? Like we don't always have to just skip to the end. Like same as like when we're in lifting weights, we're not trying to get you in lifting the heaviest weight possible. We're going to start at the beginning and we're going to progressively work our way through it. And like I said, that could be. Portion size is almost always the case. Like ultimately, you can lose weight eating complete shit. You can eat Mars bars, and if you don't have enough calories, you will still lose weight. And also, you can eat like veg, lean chicken breast, but if you eat enough volume of it, you'll gain loads of extra fat because you're still pouring too many calories and not expending enough of them. So portion size ultimately ends up always kind of being something to manipulate, because even portion size, not in terms of like the overall volume of food, but thinking about what's on the plate. If you're like, I'm doing a chicken pasta bake or something like that, then we know that a big chunk of that is going to be quite saucy. So there's going to be a lot of carbs and fats in the sauce. So if we can find a lower calorie sauce, or maybe just use a little bit less sauce, have more lean chicken in there. So then the portion on the plate could still be of equal volume, but it is made up more of protein, less of carbohydrates and fats. So there's other ways of manipulating it. It's not just make it all smaller. That tends to be it as well, though. You probably will still make it smaller. But what does the plate contain, and can we pull some carbs away, increase a little bit of protein? That's always like a really easy trade to make. Okay.
So the dish is soft on pure steady.
Yeah.
Not bad in that sense. That's
It's all right. Yeah, no worries. Anyone who needs to go, it's completely fine. I'll stick around until all the questions are done. But right. Any other questions? No, we all good. Right. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Chris.